Most choices are not moral ones, but when you do come up against one, it's nice to have a solid moral philosophy to help guide that moral decision making. But even with one in place, it's still nice to run through some speculative thought experiments, since in the heat of the moment, who can remember every little thing Kant said? And what better medium is there for engaging with these kinds of moral quandaries than video games? They're the best medium for getting the audience to quickly empathize with a main character, after all. However, no game I'm aware of has really explored this space in an interesting way. If you think you have one in mind, please share, I'd love to check it out. But just because there isn't a morality system worth talking about doesn't mean we don't have anything to talk about. After all, games can still feature moral choices. So, for example, let's look at the 4 endings of Fallout New Vegas and determine the morality of each. Hello world, my name is Atticus, and welcome to the experiment. If you're unfamiliar, Fallout New Vegas has you decide the fate of a post-apocalyptic Las Vegas and surrounding areas by picking one of 4 factions to support with your considerable protagonist power. These factions are Mr. House, the incumbent libertarian ruler, the Democratic New California Republic, the conservative Caesar's Legion, and you. Their names mostly betray their politics. Mr. House is the house in the casino saying, "The house always wins." He's pretty chill with people doing more or less what they want, so long as that adds to his power and wealth. The New California Republic, or NCR for short, want to recreate pre-apocalyptic California and adjacent lands. So, in a way, they're technically conservative, but Caesar's Legion wants to go a fair bit further back, a couple thousand years to ancient Rome. And listen, I like the place as much as the next person, but I wouldn't want to live there. Ancient Rome, that is. I would absolutely live in modern Rome. And finally, there's you, and whatever politics you hold. With the lives of tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people at stake, the question of who should rule the Mojave is undoubtedly a moral quandary. Handing the Mojave to Mr. House, or rather keeping him in power, gets us this ending slide. Mr. House's Securitron army took control of Hoover Dam and the Strip, pushing both the Legion and the exhausted NCR out of New Vegas. Mr. House continued to run New Vegas his way, a despotic vision of pre-war glory. The streets were orderly, efficient, cold. New Vegas continued to be the sole place in the wasteland where fortunes were won and lost in the blink of an eye. You probably feel some type of way about that end card, but let's look at it through the lens of a moral philosophy, perhaps liberalism. This seems like a reasonable point for this quick disclaimer. I took 2 classes on ethics several years ago. Please do not take your morality from this video. Liberalism's main tenet is individual freedom. In a nutshell, a person should be able to do whatever they want, so long as it doesn't impede on another's freedom. With the word despotic in the description, this philosophy does not seem to pair well with the ending. But wait, what's that? It's John Locke with the social contract. That's right, the second core piece of liberalism is that it is not simply enough to do whatever you want. To live in a society, you have to trade some of your freedoms in exchange for security. To breach that contract is not necessarily morally wrong, but it would be justification for kicking you out of the community. In New Vegas, the social contract is that you live according to the rules as set up by Mr. House. And in return, you live in relative safety and can engage in rapid upward and especially downward economic mobility. To forcibly change the social contract of the at least 59 people that live in New Vegas would break the major principle of liberalism, and therefore it is morally obligatory to keep Mr. House in charge of New Vegas. The NCR winning the Battle of Hoover Dam nets us this end card. The new California Republic celebrated its second victory at Hoover Dam, establishing definitive control over the entire Mojave wasteland. Soon after, they negotiated terms to annex the Strip, Freeside, and many surrounding communities. The Mojave wasteland, at long last, had entirely fallen under the NCR's banner. Which, on its own, doesn't really tell us much about the morality of this choice, so we might have to dig a bit deeper. What is it like to live in the NCR? What they strive for is a civilization where survival is an assumption rather than a goal. One where the people are free and enjoy equality under the law. And they seem to be making progress towards that goal, though there are hiccups. The NCR is rather prone to corruption, and they make the worst decisions about every other group in the Mojave unless you directly intervene for a better outcome. But they are trying to be good, and there's something deontological to say about that. Deontology says that an action is moral if the intention behind it is good, regardless of the consequences. Most moral theories would agree that feeding a starving person is good. If, however, that starving individual died from overeating after so long without food, a consequentialist theory would call that a bad action in retrospect, as it resulted in the death of a person. But deontology would hold that the action was morally good since you fulfilled your duty to feed a hungry person. In a similar sense, the NCR attempts to do a lot of good, despite the outcomes being less than stellar, and if nothing else, they're not described as despotic, chaotic, or as mass-murdering slave owners. So you could say there's a moral obligation to ensure that the NCR comes out on top in the battle for Hoover Dam and the fate of the Mojave. Caesar's Legion... Look, you see the bit by now. Just don't think too hard for this one. How do we defend Caesar's Legion? We're gonna have to use utilitarianism. That's a given. And we're going to have to mostly ignore everything the Legion does. Okay, there are two end slides for the Legion, one where Caesar is alive and one where he is not. Caesar entered the Strip as though it was his triumph. The Legion pushed the NCR out of New Vegas entirely, driving them back to the Mojave outpost. The Legion occupied all major locations, enslaving much of the population and peacefully lording over the rest. Under the Legion's banner, civilization, unforgiving as it was, finally came to the Mojave wasteland. Is the end card for when Caesar survives, and the legate is crowned as the new Caesar. He entered the Strip as though it was a military target, destroying anyone who resisted him. The Legion brutally occupied all major locations, killing and enslaving a large amount of the population. Under the Legion's banner, civilization, savage as it was, finally came to the Mojave wasteland. Is the one for when he's not. The first one has slavery, but is described as peaceful. The other has slavery and mass murder, so for the sake of the exercise, we'll assume the courier bought in on Caesar's nonsense and saved his life. You could say that at least the trains run on time? You shouldn't, to be clear, because that was propaganda that Mussolini spread, and the trains most definitely did not run on time, on top of all of the other terrible things. But in the lands run by Caesar's Legion, caravans can travel with no fear, because the possible consequences of breaking any of Caesar's laws are far worse than anything you could gain. You could put a utilitarian spin on it. The bad done reduces future bad acts, which could, in theory, result in a net good. Though, since you're comparing things that did happen to things that did not, you could make any argument. But the freedom offered by the other endings do little to curtail the many crimes in the post-apocalypse. So, for the net good, it is morally obligatory to allow Caesar to conquer the Mojave. Goodness, I feel like I have to wash my mouth out with soap or something. Now for the easy one. you're a moral individual, right? Under the virtuous person theory, an action is moral if it's one that a virtuous person would take. And if you consider yourself virtuous, then it should follow that every action you take is morally good. If you take Vegas for yourself, you can be sure that you will lead it in a morally good way, but the other leaders are not you, and for as good as they might lead, you just can't be sure that they do a better job than you, so you ought to take control yourself. You could say it's a moral obligation. So if you haven't figured it out, I'm a bit of a moral nihilist. When I had to take an ethics in the modern age course for undergrad, I made a point of arguing the most nonsense thing I could within whatever moral theory we were talking about. And this video is a continuation of that, after seeing the earnest question, which Fallout New Vegas ending is the most morally correct? Except it's been several years since I learned these philosophies. To actually answer that question, it's not the fascism of Caesar's Legion, and it's not the tyrannical capitalism of Mr. House. A benevolent dictatorship is technically the best and most efficient form of government, so if you really are a virtuous person, then the yes man ending could work, but it's almost guaranteed to collapse when you die, and then we end up with probably another Mr. House. So, despite their flaws, and they put more than enough of them in the game to try to make this a question, the NCR is your best bet. They have established infrastructure, so it's not likely to collapse after a single death, and its social contract does not demand all of your freedoms. So that's the answer. Every Fallout New Vegas ending is morally obligatory, except for the ones that aren't. I have been Atticus, and thank you for participating.